Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be another in my series of videos looking at the team position by position, sort of going through it, looking at where we are as it relates to the players, both as the quality of the players and also the quality of their contracts. And I'm going through this series position by position as we head into the off season and getting ready for free agency next month. I've already done 2 videos on this, looking at quarterbacks and running backs and wide receivers and tight ends. So I'll put a link up there to those videos if you haven't watched those. But today we're going to be taking a look at the offensive line, which is really intriguing this year. There's a lot that could potentially happen in the offseason, given some of the age of the players that we have on the team and also given some of the contracts that are there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the guys that we have on the offensive line.
And starting to talk about the offensive line, we really have to start with the offensive tackles. And that's where the intrigue starts right away. If you're looking at Jason Peters, who's our left tackle, it really raises some interesting situations. First of all, it should be pointed out, there's only 2 guys on the offensive line all season that played and started in all 16 games. Jason Peters is one of those 2. But on the other side of things, he's also going to be one of the oldest guys on the team, and he's also going to count the most against the cap next year. Right now, as things stand, he would count $11.2 million against the cap. If they wanted to save money, they could cut him, and it would actually save $9.2 million against the cap. It would only cost $2 million if they were to cut him now. And that's why you saw the reports that came out this week where they've asked him to take a pay cut to stay on. And that's a real possibility as to what they could end up doing with him. And that really sort of raises a question, though. If they do that, then really what they're going to end up doing is they have to give him a contract extension and delay some of his money. So that's only going to end up pushing more money down the road, which you'll end up having to pay for. So I'm not a big fan of that move, but I would be okay if they kept him at his current number or released him and got the cap space. Really, I think either move has its pluses and its minuses, and it's really a question of how you view him and how you view the offensive line as a unit going forward, and whether or not you want to stick with some of the older guys that are more proven, or if you want to try and grow with a young line, with a young quarterback, and try and grow for the future over the next 5 years, for instance. Because let's face it, Jason Peters isn't going to be here 5 years from now, given his age. But he really raises an interesting point, and making that even more interesting is the fact of what you would do with him if you would cut him, which brings us to our right tackle, who's Lane Johnson. And Lane Johnson, first of all, he's the second biggest cap hit next year on the team at $10 million. But what makes him obviously more interesting, or intriguing, I should say, is because the fact that he's one mistake away from landing himself in a suspension that's basically going to end his career, because it would be a major suspension if he was caught a third time for any performance-enhancing drug issues. And that really raises the question then. We missed him for 10 games this season. When he was in there, he was great. He's a solid tackle. When they drafted him, I think the plan was always to move him to the left tackle position after Jason Peters moved on. So I think that was always sort of the plan with him. And we'll talk about some of the reserves we have is in terms of what they could do at the right tackle position if they were to do that. But do you really got to ask yourself this question? When it comes to the left tackle position, which is the most important position on the line because it's protecting the blind side of your quarterback, you've got to ask, which uncertainty do you want? Do you want the uncertainty of an older player who's, basically at any moment is going to start to break down and isn't going to be the same player anymore? Or do you want the uncertainty of a guy who's basically made some stupid decisions and is just one more stupid decision away from really costing your team because you invested a lot in this guy? He was a first-round draft pick, and now, it really it becomes a problem if he ends up with another lengthy suspension, because then you're really left standing with nothing. So that's the real intriguing thing when it comes to the tackle positions is, you could get rid of Jason Peters and move Lane Johnson over there, but the question is, at what price are you doing that? The next position we really need to talk about is the 2 guards. In terms of the guards that we had this year, I think the guards were solid we had. Alan Barbary, who's pictured here, ended up starting for 12 games. He ended up playing 12 games and starting 12 games at the left guard position. Initially, it was thought he does have some versatility, which is why I really like him. He doesn't count that much against you the cap. Against the cap, he's just under $2 million this coming season, so he doesn't cost you that much. He provides some versatility where he can slide out and play the tackle position. In fact, that's what they were planning on doing with him when they were going to when Lane Johnson originally was going to. The Lane Johnson suspension was originally announced. That was the discussion, as they were going to move him out to the right tackle position. But ultimately, they decided to keep him in at guard and play Vitae at the tackle. So he does provide that versatility, and is a guy that you can go ahead and slide out to the tackle position. So I fully expect that he's going to come back next year and play for us. And I would expect that he'll continue to be a good contributor for the team. That brings us to the other guard position, which is Brandon Brooks, who once again was another solid performer for us all year at the guard position. Played and started in 14 games this season. And he's one of these guys similar to Nelson Aguilar, which you're not going to cut him due to his salary anyway, because he would actually cost you more to cut him than it would be to keep him. Now, he was one of our bigger free agent signings during the offseason last year. So that's why his contract is such as it is, because the signing bonus that you'd end up having to prorate into this year would all get dumped, and that's why he makes no sense to cut him from a salary cap standpoint. But frankly, he was a solid player for us this year, so there's no reason why I think you'd want to cut him anyway. So I really think he was a solid guy for us all season. I would fully expect him also to continue playing in at the right guard position. Hoping he can stay healthy. He did miss 2 games, due to health reasons. So hopefully he can stay healthy and continue to be a contributor, because I think that he's really got a lot of promise to continue on and really start to solidify the offensive line. That brings us to the center position, which is also where it gets a little interesting again. And Jason Kelce obviously started at center. He was the only other guy on the offensive line that started and played in all 16 games this season. Ironically, the 2 guys that did that are the 2 oldest guys on the offensive line. Jason Kelce is going to be over 30 years old this coming season. And he's also a candidate to get cut because of the salary implications. They could save $3.8 million against the cap if they cut him. And for that reason, they might decide to go ahead and move on from him. And I'm okay if they do that as well, only because for a couple of reasons. He's been a solid performer for us for a number of years. But all in all, I think that he has, I think, digressed a little bit in the last season or two. And he's also a little bit undersized, I think, for the center position. I made comments during this past season that there was times where I think we didn't run into the interior line in short yardage situations because they're concerned about Kelce's size. And I think that is sort of an issue that you've got with him. So it's one of those things that if you decided that you want to go young on the offensive line, to grow a young offensive line with a young quarterback, then Kelce would make sense to move on from, because you could save money against the cap if you let him go. He's a little bit older, and you do have a guy that could come in and play for him. And that's another intriguing part as we get into some of the reserves. That brings up Isaac Seumalo. And he's one of those guys that he has some versatility. He played a lot of the season at the guard position. He played in 9 games this season, started 4 of them, played pretty solid at the guard position, but he can also play the center position, and he's a little bit bigger than Jason Kelce. So for that reason, I would be actually okay if they decided to move on from Jason Kelce and moved Seumalo to the center position and tried to grow with a young offensive line. You talk about a center and a quarterback having some chemistry, that they know how to work together, and having that over the course of a long time can really be helpful. So making that change now might be better rather than trying to make that change a season or 2 from now. So for that reason, I'd be totally on board if they cut Jason Kelce for Isaac Seumalo and tried to play him at the center position. Now, a lot of that has to do with, we didn't see Seumalo play at the center position, so a lot of that has to do with what the coaches think in terms of whether he can make that transition or not. If he can make that transition, then I think that this is absolutely the right move to make. If not, and they view him more as a guard, then I would think that they wouldn't make that move. But I think that is a possibility for a move, and that's why looking at the 2 Jasons during this offseason and what the team does with them, Jason Peters and Jason Kelce, is really intriguing because you do have some young guys that could take over for them. And that brings up one of the other reserves we had this year. I'm not going to try and say his first name, but Vaitai, or Big V as the team refers to him as. And, you know, he played in 7 games, started 6 of them this season. And, you know, he's the one that came in and played for Lane Johnson when he went out with the suspension. And, you know, that first game, I think he really struggled against the Redskins, but then I think he really came into his own. And for that reason, he's a guy that you could, if you decide to move Lane Johnson out to the left tackle position, I think Vaitai, it would make a lot of sense to play at the right tackle position. And once again, you could go younger on that offensive line and really decide that that's what you want to do for the long term. So for that reason, I think that it would make some sense to move on from Jason Peters and start the 2 younger guys at the tackle positions. By the way, Vaitai is still in his rookie contract, so he costs very little. As a matter of fact, it's just under $600,000 that he's going to cost you against the cap this year. So really, he would be a bargain for you. And for that reason, it would make a lot of sense if they wanted to try and free up cap space to make that move, to let go of Jason Peters, and then to go ahead and play Vaitai at the right tackle and Lane Johnson at the left tackle position. Another interesting question they've got to ask in terms of some of the reserve offensive linemen is Stefan Wisniewski, who played all 16 games this season, started in 6 of them, and he really was a versatile guy, was able to play those interior line positions, but he is an unrestricted free agent, so if you want to keep him, you're going to have to re-sign him. And I think that that's an interesting situation, because I don't know that he'd want to re-sign with the Eagles, because I think he wants to be a starter somewhere. If we're going to re-sign him, we're going to re-sign him as a reserve. He's not going to come in as a starter, especially when you look at the interior offensive line. The interior offensive line is completely set. Even if you were to move on from Jason Kelce, I don't think you're going to replace him with Wisniewski. You're going to replace him with Seumalo. So I think that for that reason, he's not going to be a starter on this team. And whether he or not he wants to re-sign here knowing that, I think is probably a real question. And I think that the only way they keep him is if he hits the free agency market, doesn't get signed with somewhere, and the Eagles offer him a contract to come back and play for, you know, one more season as a reserve. And that's probably how we'd end up bringing him back. A couple other reserves we have to talk about. This is Josh Andrews. It's pictured in this picture. He only played in 3 games this season, and I don't see them really worrying about bringing him back. He cost you virtually nothing. He's a guy that certainly could get replaced as part of a draft pick or something like that. The other guy that's a little more intriguing that I couldn't find a picture of was Matt Tobin. He played in 12 games this season and started in 1 of them, but you know, I think he's a guy that if he ends up starting for you, you've got problems. He's an okay as a reserve, and I could see them bringing him back in that capacity just to sort of provide a little bit of depth on the offensive line. But if he's the guy that you're looking to try and play any extended period of time, you're in trouble, I think. So for that reason, I don't see them making that move to really keep Tobin at any big number. He is signed for next season and it won't cost you that much. So I could see them bringing him back next season. But that's where it sort of breaks down on this offensive line. It's a real interesting situation moving into this offseason.
So there you have it. Those are my thoughts as it relates to the Eagles and the offensive line as we get ready to head into free agency next month. And it's going to be really intriguing, especially as it relates to the 2 Jasons, Jason Peters and Jason Kelce, given their age and their contracts, to see exactly what the Eagles do. Like I said, I'm okay either way they want to go with this, but it's going to be really interesting at any rate. Let me know in the comments below what you think, though. Do you think I'm completely crazy and we need to absolutely keep these 2 guys, or are you on the other side of the spectrum and say, hey, listen, forget about them. They're old. They're over 30. Let's go young and grow with a young team and see what we can do. So what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. So check back next weekend. I'll be continuing this series. We're going to flip now to the defensive side of the football. I'll be doing defensive line and linebackers and taking a look at really the front 7 and where we stand with all those. Until next week, though, fly Eagles fly.